Welcome to this month's NoVA UX Meetup. In this evening's talk by Travis Avery from Slalom Consulting, we'll be learning about co-creating a shared vision and or mission statement, and how that can help start things off right with your next project. Travis is a Principal Experience Strategist at Slalom Consulting with expertise in leading multifaceted teams to create innovative consumer-facing applications and developing large-scale enterprise solutions. Thank you for joining us this evening, Travis.
No, not a problem. Thank you for the introduction. This is actually my first presentation with this group, so thank you all for being willing to join, especially given the slightly, almost ironically awkward title that I put together. It was one of those things where after I had sent out the title, I was like, this is slightly weirdly worded, everything else. So I started before this actually will tie in a little bit. I was like, okay, well, what's a better title for this and how we might go and edit this together. So I'm creating a human-centered vision and mission. And I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. But I don't think it really satisfies this group or this audience. So I was continuing to think about it. I'm like, actually, this is a little bit better. Why having a vision and mission is important for UX and for UX design. I've been doing this kind of experience design for some odd 20 years. I was the awkward kid that actually used, started putting together websites and applications kind of in my spare time in high school. And that's how I got my start. And as I kind of progressed in my career, I started realizing having these bigger kind of missions, these bigger kind of statements that kind of align everybody really helps overall to kind of make sure everybody is on the same page and working towards the same goals, et cetera. So, just to start out, this is the kind of mission and vision that I've done this kind of activity for a few different projects now. I try to do it at the beginning of kind of new projects that I'm started with clients, et cetera. But also when I'm working with teams and within companies, this is what I try and kind of start with is just, what are we all working towards? What is your goal that you're trying to accomplish? So starting out, just definitions, most of these are pretty basic, but what is the vision or what is a vision statement? The easiest way to think of a vision statement is this is who you want to be when you grow up. So this is, when you're talking about a project, when you're talking about a product, when you're talking about a team or a company, this is who you aspire to be. This is what that product that you're working on aspires to become. What is your North Star? What are you all working towards? Whereas a mission is a little bit more tactical. Like when you're talking about creating this kind of shared mission, it's how do you get there? So you have this idea of where you want to go to. Creating that shared mission is really kind of that North Star of like, okay, what tactically are we going to do in order to accomplish that? So from a very high level, that's what the difference between a vision statement and a mission statement is. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but really the goal of these is really to kind of act as guiding principles for everyone you're working with. So they're less about you personally, and you'll hear me say this a few times. If you're writing a mission or a vision for yourself, then it's going to fail. It's not going to be successful. It's not going to resonate. Ultimately, people aren't going to pay attention to it. It should really start to communicate the purpose of what it is you're doing. So when you're talking about it, normally you see vision statements most common with companies or corporations, it's like, here's our vision, here's our mission. Usually you see it on either their About Us page, or you see it on their careers page as you start checking out a website. But the other thing that a lot of people don't think about is kind of the value of having kind of a shared mission for a team or a department, or even a specific product or project that you're starting or have started. Just because that tends to kind of foster a lot more of that kind of, shared kind of ownership over what it is. And when you have that shared ownership, and I'm gonna say shared a lot because it's something that shouldn't just be kind of gatekept. It's something that should be kind of democratized, for lack of a better word. like when you have that shared understanding of where it is you're going to, you're all working towards the same goal and you're not fighting one another. And the best example I have of this is like on a project that I put together years ago. You know, if people were kind of rummaging around a little bit, trying to find, you know, we had testers, we had software developers, we had some business people, and each one had their own, like, you know, goal or agenda as part of what they were working on. And so I kind of put the brakes on things a little bit and kind of go, okay, well, I didn't do the full activity I'm about to walk you through, but I really focused on like, okay, what is the goal? Like, who are we, what is the problem, and who are we solving the problem for, and why? And what I loved about that is at the end of the project, as I was beginning to roll off and I was kind of done with my part and I was just trying to leave, you know, people were saying, okay, why are we making certain decisions the way we're making them? And I just gave some answers kind of dismissively almost. And I had the QA person go, no, that goes against our mission statement that we put together at the beginning of this, that we all agreed on. And I had to take a step back and go, you're right. You're absolutely correct. I'm wrong in this scenario. I love it when I am wrong. Absolutely adore it. But why is this an experience design problem? Like, I think that's kind of the core of it. Like when you think of these things, you think, oh, this has to be taken care of by the business. But when it comes down to it, if your vision isn't human-centered, or if your mission isn't human-centered, if it isn't focused on the people you're trying to solve the problems for, ultimately it kind of becomes more about just how do you make money, which doesn't really resonate with, well, it resonates with some people, but it doesn't quite resonate with, you know, everybody working on the team. Everybody's then kind of working on it for a selfish reason. How do I finish my part as quickly as I can? How, you know, how do we just maximize whatever metrics that we're, or KPIs that we're trying to drive towards? But having that mission gives something where it's like, okay, well, how do our goals align to that mission? You know, when you have an experience-driven vision and mission, it helps to provide overall direction for everybody, not even just you as a designer, so you all know what you're working towards. But when you build it together, you get this buy-in from everybody, where everybody has this sense of ownership. Everybody is as protective of it as you are. And it's up to kind of the entire group to make sure to continue to shepherd it. But it also helps with just kind of making decisions, like overall, like, you know, when you get to a point ultimately in a product or a project and you're trying to make a decision between two things, like it could be something like features or functionality, or even just like which user or audience member are you trying to focus this experience on, ultimately it makes those decisions much easier because you're solving a common problem. It's like, no, we agreed at the beginning we are solving a problem for this person. And the other thing it kind of has an unintended consequence for is whatever it is you happen to be working on kind of has, like, you know, it kind of works as a differentiator for those things that you are working on. So when things are really competitive and different projects are trying to get picked up, it becomes a whole lot easier for you to advocate for the thing you're working on, because you have a cohesive vision for what it's going to be, and you know how you're going to accomplish it with that clear mission statement. So it helps to create that better advocate in both you as well as your team members, because they can take it and own it without you there. But then, like, when do you start defining that? This is one of the kind of last things you start thinking of. So when you're kind of trying to define what your purpose is, when do you do it? The correct answer is as early as you possibly can. But in reality, this tends to be something that I see people lack a lot on projects because of time. It's like, no, I don't have the time for that. We can't sit down and think of that. Let's just move on. We know we have to get stuff done. So really the best time to do it ends up being when there isn't a mission or vision. But really, you want to start taking a look at your mission once you have it at a few different points. When you're making plans for the future. So when you're kind of going, okay, what are we working on next? The second is kind of early in that kind of project or product ideation, when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to build? What are we going to create? What is our team going to do? And then just like regular cadences. Like every year you should be looking at your mission just to kind of go, is this still relevant? A lot of companies fail in that, where they did their mission statement like 20 years ago, they're good, but it's one of those, it's like, you don't even talk about like mobile phones or the technology landscape has changed since then. Like if your mission is old enough to be going to college, you probably need to rethink it. And at least, address it. It doesn't need to drastically change. You can kind of make tweaks thereof, but, it should change and evolve and grow as you and your team and your products and projects do. And then kind of the last big thing here, kind of in the why statements that I have in my boring black slides that I kind of have here is who is it for? And the audience of who's reading this is really important. And I think more so than anything else, because it's both a rallying point for you and your team, as well as for your clients and customers. Because, if you think of it in terms of like almost a sales pitch externally, it's one of those, it's like, well, what are you about? You can answer that quickly. And then the other ones are for peers, not necessarily, on your same team, but people outside of your team too, so that they can start to articulate what it is you're doing and the value that it's doing. So knowing that, one of the things I've done in the past a lot is kind of take a look at, well, what are some of these missions that we've seen out there? And so I pulled some different mission and vision statements that I found from various companies, including the company I'm currently part of. And started trying to actually analyze what makes a good mission statement and what makes a bad mission statement kind of thing, and what makes a good company vision and what makes a bad company vision, et cetera. And, I was joking about this earlier, but me being a millennial, the best way to articulate this is actually through GIFs. Kind of what makes a really bad mission or vision statement is when it's a little bit too aspirational. The show Silicon Valley is actually a great example of this, because they kind of have everybody's vision statement being the I'm making the world a better place through this really obscure thing. That's not for your audience. That's for you. That's for the CEO to feel good about himself. If you're making the world a better place through, Bitcoin transactions, you're not really making the world a better place. You may be kind of making people's lives easier by streamlining systems and processes, but you're not changing the world in this way unless you're inventing a Bitcoin, or a Bitcoin-like competitor. And so the other ones is when it's, when it starts to feel a little bit too aspirational. It almost feels random when it doesn't have like a meaning behind it, when there's no tactical thing. It's just sort of like okay, we're just going to spin the wheel to make ourselves feel a little bit better here. But then on the flip side of things, when you get too tactical about your mission and vision, it kind of builds a little bit of existential dread. If your mission is just to make as much money as possible, or if your vision is to it's just like, we just need to get this stuff done quick, it kind of builds almost a depressing state for people. This is from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. If you're unfamiliar, Marvin the paranoid android is one of my favorite characters. He's just a depressed robot is kind of his character. But people are just kind of working for themselves at that point and not working to actually make, working cohesively as a team. It's just like, well, I've got to do my part, and I'm just going to do my part and be done. So weirdly enough, the best metaphor I have for like how vision and mission statements start to matter is you can almost imagine a web page, like either an about us page of a company's website, or the product details of a product website, or even like a good meetup group. Like when you're talking about your vision, like I said before, this is really like where do we aspire to go? What are we trying to kind of say about ourselves? And the mission is, how do we intend to get there? And everything else, like your pillars of success, any sort of goals or metrics you have, can all start to funnel up almost to those missions and visions. And if they're not doing that, then you either need to readdress your mission and vision, or you need to change what your kind of goals or metrics of success are for what those things are. But I want to get a little bit more tactical. Like we talked up until now about, you know, why these are important, but how do you actually do this? Like, you know, if I was in a company and I was in a team and we're all kind of off in our own little world, we're not working cohesively. If I was on a product team and nobody's working towards the same product, what do I do to try and fix that? So I created this hopefully handy dandy how-to guide for creating a shared mission and vision. And the correct answer for this is there's not a right or wrong way. I recommend bringing everybody into the process and doing like a group activity of some kind. But really the kind of purpose is to just make sure everybody knows what that mission is. So the first thing is kind of pick your format, like pick your poison. There are tons of different resources out there. I added a few links on the screen here for ones that I find valuable. I'll leave the screen up for a few seconds in case people want to take a screenshot. IDEO does something they call kind of purpose statements, and they've got a few publicly available blog posts. Nielsen Norman Group, also huge. They've got a ton of different articles on creating UX vision statements. A buddy of mine who I work with, RF, he always does kind of lean UX canvases, which accomplish a lot of the same goals. And essentially, it's just kind of creating a grid, a workshop activity that everybody can kind of be a part of. And Mural also has a blog post on creating kind of product visions. The one I tend to lean towards, which is the kind of one in kind of on the right hand of the screen here, is really, it's from a book by Jeffrey A. Moore, Crossing the Chasm. And really, it's kind of a fill in the blanks. Almost think of it as a Mad Libs style kind of activity, where what you do is you have a sentence that you start with and everybody starts filling in the blanks. And this can be done via like a questionnaire. This can be done via, you know, an in-person activity. I've done this a lot in Miro and Mural, but the idea here is you kind of take turns, everybody going through and adding what they think each of these are. You know, and so this statement starts out: for our users who have a need or problem, the name of product or solution or whatever is a type of a product, solution, or whatever. But unlike our competitors, you know, our product or we do these things differently is the best way to think of it. And the purpose of any of these activities are not necessarily to follow them exact, but it's really just to get everybody to start putting things out there, to just start getting that information. None of these are going to end up, or probably shouldn't end up, like they started. So you're going to need to kind of play the part of copy editor here to kind of, you know, make a cohesive statement out of these different things. Is the best way to kind of think of it. So, you know, obviously you've got to set up the activity. Like, you need to introduce your team to the concept. Hopefully some of the earlier slides can help you actually do that. For the rest of the tutorial, I'm assuming a workshop, because that's how I've done it most in the past. But like I said before, you can do this in a lot of different ways, and there are different formats for it. So do what feels right for you and your team to get this done. I've done this for executives. I've done this for kind of product teams. And I even have an example at the end where I've done this for like startups before, to even define what they're doing. And part of the reason for this too, and this is going to sound a little bit more cynical, but it's to get the real reason why you're doing what you're doing on paper. Even if you don't end up putting it in the mission or vision, oftentimes people have hidden agendas that they're doing as they're going through these things, or they've got a perspective that they haven't told you yet. This helps. A lot of these kind of activities help to kind of pull those out of people. So it's just, and the best example I have of this is actually a startup that I worked with, where they wanted, you know, an Alexa version of their application. And we were all really confused because their existing application was a mobile app. It worked really well. It was super seamless. And we were just like, okay, you can hire us to make an Alexa version of your app. And as we were talking to them about it, and as we went through this mission activity, we ultimately came to the discovery that it wasn't that they wanted an Alexa version of the app, they wanted to be kind of they wanted to get acquired. And so for them, it was like, how do we build the platform, that, or the intellectual property to be able to do that. And so we changed our approach when we realized that. And we did that the first week instead of the last week, when you're scrambling and doing long nights and weekends to try and, create as much value as you can. And ultimately, I don't know whether or not they ended up getting acquired, but we built them a fantastic platform that they could use in the future. The other thing is be sure to explain to everybody what the activity etiquette is. It's always important to encourage people to ask questions, to collaborate. So I always splash up something like this, where it just hopefully just gets a little bit of those creative juices flowing. And even you'll see I actually put ask questions multiple times, just to reinforce the fact that people should be asking questions. People should be challenging you. If they don't understand something, or if I'm explaining something poorly, they should be able to pipe in. But then once you start the activity, you just go through the motions. Like I said earlier, once you have your format picked, once you have your process picked, you can just have people start filling in those blank activities, hopefully grabbing large sticky notes if you're in person, or dropping them if you're in a virtual environment or something like that. But depending on the size of the group that you're working with and how much time you have to do these kind of activities, you can also have at the end, once people are done with each category, have people talk through their ideas, go one person by person, go, well, what did you put up here? What did you think? Because that'll get other ideas flowing and get more people to start, oh, I like that too, I'm going to put up that sticky, or that reminds me of this, I'm going to put up that sticky. Because the idea here is to get a quantity of information. It doesn't necessarily need to be perfect. So this is one of those almost improv-like things where it's you never say no. When somebody goes, do I put this up here? It's oh yeah, you can put that up here. That may work better over here, but put that up here for now too, kind of thing. But then once the activity is done, once you've filled in the blanks, really all you're doing at that point is just thanking everybody for their time, kind of thing, and making sure they're comfortable and aware that the work and effort that they put in is going to make you successful as part of this. And the thing you don't want to do at this point is start actually trying to come up to finish the statement in the activity. That's not going to happen. If you're trying to do that, then it's just going to create a lot of stress on you and the team, etc. The idea here at this point is just thank everybody, tell them how much they're going to, value they're going to add overall, and really just do your best to end things on a positive note for them. Because what you're going to do next is actually the hard part. It's the synthesis of your findings. This part ends up being there are tons of different ways you can do it. You've got all these sticky notes and you're supposed to filter them down into a cohesive statement or two. And everybody's going to ideate differently here. So it's really what are you most comfortable with? If you haven't done this kind of thing before, it's just try to play copy editor and reduce it all as much as you can. Something else you can do is just get a second opinion, not just from the perspective of being oh, well, what do you think? But also sometimes just explaining what it is you're trying to accomplish to someone else helps the creative juice flows for yourself. This one is the less fun one, but it's one I actually do a lot, where I'll actually take everybody's notes and feedback and put them into a spreadsheet and add a bunch of rows or columns for things that I find, interesting, different categories, tags, if multiple people voted for the same one, I can put those in there, and I can use that to filter the results in a way that makes sense for me. I know Excel is a designer's least favorite friend, but sometimes it is still helpful. I think PowerPoint is number 2, and being a consultant, that's my bread and butter, unfortunately, much to my dismay. But what about a real world example of how something like this went down? I'm actually gonna use myself as an example here and my team. So for a little bit of backstory, at the beginning of the year, me and my team locally, we were asked to Well, what are your goals for the year? And what are you guys trying to accomplish this upcoming year for 2023? And we're like, okay, we'll get back to you. And we were really struggling to kind of figure out what those goals were. We were kind of a small, scrappy team of like, we started out the previous year with like, 2 or 3 people, and then we grew to like 9 or 10. And so we were really struggling overall to kind of figure out, well, what are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish for the year? I have to give a little bit of backstory at this point. The company I work for is named Slalom Consulting. And the way we operate is really, I find, unique, where although we're this big global firm with all these different offices, blah, 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 yada, 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 like no different than anybody else, the way we focus is really locally. So, our team operates independently in Washington, D.C. We also have offices, and each of these offices operate independently. Each has their own team. Each focuses on stuff that serves their area the best. And so we're rarely like given orders from our corporate parents as we're kind of going through here. We do every once in a while, but for the most part, we're kind of just asked to kind of build our practice independently. And our organization, as like a parent organization, a daddy organization, if you will, they actually have their own like mission and vision and their purpose statements and like why they're doing what they're doing. And so part of us was like, but our team didn't. We went from a scrappy group of a few people where, we were like, we'll do it. Doesn't matter what we'll do, but we'll do it. We can do it. To like a group of like 10 to 12, where we actually need to start operating as a business and not just like a Swiss Army design and team, especially as we kind of continued to grow too. So I actually did this activity with my team where we actually spent some time, and I brought everybody in. It didn't matter how new they were to our department, our team, whether or not they were existing, etc. And I wanted everybody to participate in this. And it was a ton of fun activity. We had everybody here kind of bringing in their own, perspectives on who we were, what we were doing. And then on my own afterwards, I started compiling everybody's notes together and playing this part of copy editor. Like I said before, I brought it into an Excel spreadsheet, started filtering these. I was living in sticky note purgatory for a little while. You can actually see my desk there where I just had like, little statements, like, just a sticky note that said research. Like it looks like a cheesy stock photo, but it was actually what was on my desk there. And so we did all of this, and I kind of took it afterwards and I started going through and kind of synthesizing this. And to kind of illustrate the chaotic nature of this kind of thing, to kind of give you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain for me, starting out, like I said, I've got my favorite mission statement kind of activity in my mission statement format. And so I was just kind of I took the major categories, and I just wanted to kind of plug them in to kind of see, well, will this work as like a mission statement? And it worked. It was okay. It's a little bland corporate sounding because these are big categories and everything else, and not what I had kind of fun. It was very bland. It sounded like, everybody, everybody's consulting firm. Ultimately I kind of scrapped it almost immediately because there's a lot of in here that kind of isn't even needed for our use case. So instead I wanted to kind of bring everybody's ideas into it because there was so much good content that came out of that. And I simplified the way I was organizing this, and I kind of recategorized it in Excel as 4 different big categories. Who are we? What are we doing? How are we doing it? And who do we want to work with? And I was like, I'm going to put everybody's ideas in here, and everybody's idea is going to be represented in its entirety. And, why can't I do that? And really the reason is because you end up with a lot of jargony nonsense as you're going through here, where you start kind of having almost acronym soup and word soup that all kind of mean the same thing. And a lot of run-on sentences. And so, okay. I like where I'm going here with this though. So I'm just going to take it and try and make it a little bit cohesive. So I was able to kind of make it into what reads as like a good about us description. It's pretty close, but it's still very long-winded. It's not quite the Star Wars text crawl that we had on the previous one. But it's still one of those where it's like, okay, well, you know, this is saying a lot and people aren't going to read this. And I actually have to give a little bit of credit at this point to some of my collaborators, because at this point I was like, I could take this and continue filtering it down and continue editing it down. But I actually wanted to bring more kind of diverse kind of viewports and opinion. And so I actually brought in my director, as well as somebody we had brand new on our team, kind of Brooke, who is an amazing experienced strategist that I've been working with, as well as Meghna, who's on our team, also an amazing experienced strategist. And they kind of help, help to shape and filter it down into its nearly final form with only a little bit of tweaking afterwards. So ultimately where we came up with is I kind of went through the whole tutorial that I talked through with you, including all the methods of synthesis, where I started out just thinking in terms of okay, I'm going to play the copy editor. I'm going to plug and play to try and get this to work. That didn't work. I'm going to, play the part of copy editor to filter it down. It was still pretty big. And then, the goal after that was, let's actually bring more people into this who can kind of help me take it across the finish line. And we came up with technically 3 different statements. One we kind of call our call to action, just to kind of catch people's attention. This is one I've seen a lot out in the wild. So this isn't invented by us by any stretch of the imagination, but it's really when you're talking about your team, you're talking about great experiences and how to create these human experiences. So great experiences start with a human point of view. Our vision, again, it should be aspirational. But we are leaders in the human-centered design for purpose-driven organizations in the DMV area. This says a lot in very little sentences. It says who we aspire to be, and also says who we're wanting to work with. And then finally, our mission, how do we accomplish that? Well, we co-create custom tailored experiences with our customers that drive value through our research, strategy, design, and innovation. This tells us how we accomplish our vision, which ties into kind of our call to action or our point of view almost. And so that's where we ended up with this. And I'm pretty happy with it. It's still a little bit bland, but we're also, we do need to be a little bit tactical with this in general. But that's kind of the end of my presentation here. Hopefully this all made sense and kind of showed everybody kind of how these kind of things can be used to kind of make improvements for both kind of team camaraderie as well as to kind of march across this shared vision and having this mission, et cetera, and why it's important to bring in more diverse viewpoints when you're doing this. Don't just do this in a room by yourself, especially if you're a leader. Bring in your team to do this. That's my recommendation to everybody. Heck, even bring people outside of your team. That can help too. But yeah, that's about it. That's all I've got. Thank you, everyone.
Fantastic. We do have some questions.
Excellent. I'll do my best to answer them.
Excellent. Alana asks, as a UX designer working with a business, what do you do when the mission or vision of the users conflicts with the mission of the business stakeholders?
That happens a lot, and probably more often than I think any of us really care to admit. Sometimes, like I said before, and I gave in the earlier example, the business, ultimately, we do need to be business conscious as UX designers, but the problem, it really comes down to kind of problems and solutions. What are the problems they're trying to solve? What are the problems the users are trying to solve? And how do we kind of find that middle ground? That can be done, that can be assisted through kind of creating mission statements and vision statements and things like that, because you're like, okay, we're trying to solve this problem for these people for these reasons to make the world a better place. No. There's never a completely good answer for this. It really depends on your organization. Sometimes if there's truly like a headbutting, I see if you can, I kind of do the see if you can talk to a friend who can come in and facilitate one of these working sessions. Because oftentimes if you can bring in kind of business stakeholders, kind of software developers, designers, heck, QA testers, customer service, you can bring all these people into a room to talk about what it is. oftentimes that'll get things to click for people in their head. It kind of flips on a light switch. It's not always possible or plausible. If you're able to kind of go to like a third-party firm who can kind of facilitate that, this way you don't have to be the bad guy, that can help sometimes. But sometimes it is just kind of a matter, you know, going down to brass tacks is, okay, our user, who is our user? You know, and what are they trying to accomplish? How are we making our money? It's usually through the audience that we're trying to reach. And so kind of coming to that kind of conclusion usually starts to, especially more business or more dollar and cents minded people, that's when it starts to kind of click for them, where they see where it connects. They see why, you know, UX has value. And it is kind of a journey and a trail, and one that has to be managed constantly. Visions can help, but it doesn't necessarily solve 100%. Sorry, I know that's not necessarily the answer everybody wants to hear.
And I actually got I got privately DM'd a question that's probably a good follow-up to that, and I'll share an anecdote. But I did some similar exercises like this at CNN where I work. And what was really interesting was how very tightly held vision and mission and brand is. And so it was very easy in some ways to go through this kind of exercise because everyone was so aligned already. The question I got was interesting. It was, what happens when within the team there isn't a consistent thinking about what the vision and mission are? Maybe no one's really clear, or maybe there's conflicting points of view about what the vision and mission should be. Any thoughts about how you might tackle that?
Really, it's kind of do an activity like this. Bring your team together that have these different opinions on what they are. Something that I actually found really interesting was, like, when I was done and we did those final items, it was just sort of like someone was like, oh yeah, you said specifically, like, you know, purpose driven, like where did that come from? And I was like, oh, this was this person's note, which was related to these other things. And so when everybody can kind of see their value in on a shared vision statement or shared mission statement, that's when they begin to fight for that shared mission instead of fighting for their own personal mission, which might be the case on a lot of these. So I don't know if that like answers the question properly, but it can help, and it has the potential to help with a lot of these things. Ultimately, you're going to need to find somebody who has that decision-making power to kind of draw that line in the sand, and this is our mission.
Yep. Out of curiosity, in your experience, who does that tend to be? Is there a particular, I mean, obviously there could be the CEO or marketing or something like that. Have you found there's kind of a typical role that tends to want to say this is what it should be?
Honestly, no. In all, like every organization I've worked with and everybody I've done this with, it tends to be a different person who becomes that advocate. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it is very like held by marketing because it is about brand. And so they're just sort of like, no, we need to protect this. On product and product teams, often it falls to whoever that product owner or product manager is, because they'll use that as almost a tool for them to kind of be able to kind of say, this is our product's vision. We need to be working towards it. I know that's easier, but this is going to have a better effect on our mission. Excuse me. And that's going to ultimately drive success for our product or project. I've had CEOs be the owners of it and be the shepherds of it as well. So it really does depend on the organization and who's doing it. I always try and say the UX designer, no matter what, needs to be participating in what that is. Otherwise, you're not going to be a human-centered organization. If your goal is to be a human-centered organization and you're not bringing in experience design, you're not a truly human-centered organization.
We have a question from Jacqueline. It's kind of related to the original information about you. Jacqueline is wondering, she new to the field, finishing up her portfolio, hoping to get a job in the field very soon. I'm wondering how you got into product design originally.
So I got my start making stuff in high school, in all honesty. Like, I'm kind of a bad use case example of how you get started. The best thing I think you can do is kind of create a really strong portfolio is what you're doing. But I got started, my first few items in my portfolio, I'm from San Diego, California originally. The first few items in my portfolio were websites I made to get free tickets into Comic-Con. So I put together a Batman website with a Batman blog that I put together in like a few weeks. And I was like, oh, I'm press. See, I run this Batman blog. Harder to do now than when I was, than 22 years ago or so. Like, not everybody had a Batman blog, but that's how I got my start. Was I was just doing stuff for fun, and I was using that to build my portfolio. I did, some internships as well, that kind of helped me actually get it. The internship kind of led to a job, which kind of led to a career. So in that capacity, I got lucky. But what I say is, when I'm looking to hire people, I'm looking for not just the design, not just the kind of front end look and feel, but I want to know what your thought process is. And so when I'm looking to hire someone, usually I'm looking for not only, okay, do they know how to do it? Do they know the steps involved? But what are they bringing to the table? What are they adding to it? What's special about them specifically? If I'm looking to build an innovative product, what innovative kind of solution are you going to bring to the table? Tends to be what I'm looking for. And I find it in weird places, not usually like, I've got all these great ideas. Those people usually run red flags for me. It's more along the lines of, well, what's, personally, like, what do you do for fun? Like, some people, they kind of talk about, oh, well, I've built this, app with my friends for fun. It's like, okay, that's cool. Oftentimes it's just the other things where it's like, oh, I'm really into kind of street art and kind of painting murals and stuff on the side. Those kind of things really start to kind of add more when you're kind of looking at the person, because you're like, okay, this person's not just doing, apps. But I'm also from California, where everyone has an app. If you ever go to San Francisco, everybody's outside talking about their apps. It's a little silly.
Fantastic question. I think a lot wants to know if their Batman blog is still around for viewing purposes.
It is not. I still have a copy of it locally, but it is not live anymore. It was on my buddies. In college, he put together like his own server. So I was like, can I have some server space? And so I think it was like Batman at dumpster something, like dumpster. I don't remember, like something really weird that I had as the URL, but no, he shut it down years and years ago, and it did not survive. I still have it. I could show it off one day. It's terrible.
And Jacqueline, I put a link in chat. Corey Lebson had 2 editions now of his really fantastic book on UX careers. In fact, I'm supposed to write a review of the 2nd edition, so check it out. I put the link in chat. It's really good. Here's another one. Let's see. Jason asks, have you worked with clients who try to bend their mission and vision to align with what's already in the backlog? And if so, I'm laughing, but I totally get where this question is coming from. If so, how have you dealt with this challenge? It's a great question.
Oftentimes, like, I've dealt with the same problem quite often. Heck, it inevitably does happen. Oftentimes when that does occur, you kind of need to relook at your mission and try to figure out, is it the mission's fault, or is it kind of the process's fault? Sometimes you can kind of go in and just like literally ask, well, how does this align to the mission? Or even state, like, and it depends on, I realize I come from a place of privilege. I can go into a room and just say, I don't feel like this aligns with the mission, and I can get away with that. Not everybody feels comfortable to be able to do that, and not even I do at times. But sometimes just asking the questions, like, how does this relate to the mission? How is this solving the problem for this user? Because your users should be a part of your mission. And if they're not, then you don't have a mission or a vision. So asking questions and continuing to ask questions. And yes, at times, you know, especially as business priorities change, your mission might need to change too.
Yep.
So yeah.
And it's kind of limiting too, isn't it? I mean, and when we overly tactical, right? I mean, you want a mission and a vision to inspire, to kind of elevate what you're trying to accomplish in a backlog. It's kind of like, oh, well, here's the next 10 things working that good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
I've even done it where I rank this is really cheesy, but I curate a ranking system within the backlog where it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this align with the mission and vision? And I task someone else with that, not me, because I've got a stake in the game. I've got my own biases, not the kind of product manager or product owner. They've got their own biases, but it's like, who gets to be the shepherd of the mission? And you can create that ranking. And so when you go in there, you know, it becomes another metric that they're using to decide what we work on next. Viability, feasibility, and whether or not it goes into the mission.
Nice. Let's do one more question. Adelaide asks, could you also share a little bit about how traits and principles also play a role in supporting the vision and mission? This generally can be tied to the product being built, such as a design system.
All right, I might need a little bit more information on this one. Like, what do you mean by traits exactly? Like, are you talking about how specific elements tie back to that bigger mission? Because you can start to do things like, if you're talking about a design system and how to design, you know, best design a, you know, something, you know, is, you know, tactical as like, you know, a series of buttons for that user. You can go back, you kind of go back to that original mission statement where you talk about who that customer is, and you can use that to kind of go, okay, well, which of our personas relate to that, you know, to that audience member, which of our users relate to that audience member. And you could start to pull in demographic information, like, you know, what are your users' age? Are they like 65 or older, or are they like, you know, 20? Like, what kinds of interactions and, you know, what kind of traits within a design will best appeal to that audience member that you're trying to reach. I don't know if that was the correct, the answer that you're looking for. I'll need a little bit more info on that.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, why don't we, Adelaide, you're on, Travis, you're on LinkedIn. Is it possible for folks to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they have follow-up questions?
Absolutely. You're welcome to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'll make sure my account's not private or anything. So yeah.
Fantastic. So, you know, Adelaide, if you'd like to, if you have a little more information about the question you're asking, you could also reach out and ask Travis on LinkedIn. And thank you so much, Travis. Thank you everybody who joined us this evening for participating. Those are great questions. I'm glad you all could join us. Hope you found this topic enlightening, and have a fantastic rest of your evening. We hope to see you at a future NoVA UX event. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody. Good night.